Hey, it's Hayden from Connect. Going to start this video off as part of a mini series around communicating insights and how to present your data to get the most out of your analytical process. First thing we're going to cover today is rolling averages, or sometimes moving averages. So a rolling average, it's a way of smoothing the data. So if you look here, we want to smooth a line that shows us more of a pattern. It's a little bit hectic, particularly at the start. Now, they're not predicting a direction. They're not for forecasting. A rolling average is more to define, I guess, the current pattern with a lag. So you can define the lag, how far back you want the average to go. And we've all lived through the pandemic recently. Being from the UK, the numbers were represented in terms of the number of infections as a 7-day average. So what was the 7-day average of number of infections? And that really helped in case there were days where there were issues, none were recorded because of a backlog. You wouldn't get these dips, and then the following day it would be high. So it's really about smoothing your data out to get a real understanding of what the trend is in your business. They're different to cumulative moving averages. So cumulative moving averages have a start point and they accumulate over a period of time. Moving averages work from a date and time and work backwards. You can also work forwards if you so wish. But we're going to go through a process today on how to build a moving average, rolling average, and then we're going to add a little bit of sparkle dust to it on top, and how you can modify the period that it's looking over with a what if parameter. Right, so let's get started. I have my data set here. This is a data set I've been using, sales order header, and this is the subtotal data in terms of sales. So as you can see, over a period of time, we've got this slightly downward trend. Now, there's two ways to do this. You can write a moving average yourself, which is what I'm going to show you. There is another way you can do it. If you go up to here in quick measure, you can select in here. So if you scroll down to your time intelligence section, you've got your rolling average here. So if you select rolling average, you basically drag the fields here. Now, I'm just going to show you a challenge that you may have. If you drag your date into the date field, it says only Power BI provided date hierarchies supported. That's why I'm going to show you how to write it manually. If you do want to enable date hierarchies, if you go to File, Options, in your current file data load, you enable this feature here, Time Intelligence. Okay. A lot of people choose to have that turned off. It generates extra data in your data model if you've got lots of date columns, lots of rows, so it can increase the size of your data model and it can impact performance. Okay, so let's get on to create the measure. So the first thing, we're going to give it a name. So it's going to be the rolling average subtotal. All right, and I'm going to create a variable to define how far we want the data to look back. And although this doesn't need a variable, it will come clear we're going to use that later as we change the measure. So the variable, we're going to call it months average, months history. Let's change that to an underscore. I'm going to look back at, we're going to go 11 months in this example. So I'm going to say, let's look back at the average over an 11-month period. Okay, so after variable, we've got to enter return. And then to the old faithful calculate function. Right, calculate. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have, we're going to calculate, we want to calculate the average. So we're going to use the AVERAGEX. So in the AVERAGEX, we're going to look at the table sales order header. And in that table, we're going to do sales order header subtotal. So we're comparing the same data as in the visual below. Okay. So that's the average. Next, the filter, we're going to use a function called dates in period. So we're going to tell Power BI what date range we want to look at. So the first thing it's asking for is the dates. So shift enter and we just select date, series, date. So that's the main index in the date column. Okay, so the start date we're going to use a function called last date, which I guess sounds a bit counterintuitive, but what it's doing, it's as it iterates through the date table, so all the way back from 2011 to 2014, whatever date it's iterating through, it will use that as its last date. So it doesn't necessarily mean the last date in the data set, it's the last date that it's been that it's analyzing. Okay, so last date, we want the date series date field, close that, comma, and then we want to define the number of intervals, not intervals. And for that, we're going to use the variable months history. And here we have how we define the period. So we're obviously going to go in months because that's what I've been speaking of here, but you can choose days, years, or quarters. It doesn't have weeks available to you. If you need to do weeks, it's just days with a multiplication of 7. Okay. So we're going to select month and close off that formula. So hit enter. So we have our measure created here, rolling average subtotal. Just want to put that into my measures table. Okay, so next thing is we're just going to drop this into this visual here. There you can see we've now got this rolling average that's a much smoother line that's showing more of a trend that's happened. Obviously at the start, you've got it's closely aligned with the actual data because it's not got the historical data to use as the average, so it's aligned, but you can see it really starts to smooth and pattern out, and that way you can really start to see trends in your data. Right, so next I'm going to show you how to use a what if parameter. If we wanted to change this value here from 11 months to something else, if we wanted to look at 3 months, 2 months, rather than change the visual, rather than change the measure, sometimes if you're publishing this report to your users, you don't want them changing your measures on the Power BI service, for example. So if you go into your modeling tab here, we're going to ask it for a new parameter. I'm going to call this parameter months history. It's going to be a whole number. The minimum number is going to be 1. And we want it to increment in 1 month, and it's going to have a maximum. We're just going to go up to 12 months. Let's say the default is always going to be 11. And add slice to this page. So we've now got this visual, this slicer visual here. So if we select it, you can see that we can move up between 12 and 1. And it's generated a table called months history here. That is the month's history, and there's a calculated column that's month's history value that sits in the so it's not a calculated column, it's a measure that calculates the selected value. Right, so all we have to do to add this into our measure, so where we created this variable before, this is going to be, we want this measure referred to here, month's history value. Month's history value, there. Right, so the next thing we want to do is we want this to be a negative number. So we've only put 1 to 12, we haven't done -1 to -12. So if we just multiply this by -1, that will convert a positive number to a negative number. Right, now we have that measure in place. Let's get rid of that. Let's select here. So moving this slider will modify the rolling average. So the less history we look at, see it's less fluid. The longer we look at, you can see that it smooths that line out. And that's a great feature for your users. They'll be impressed by it. But it's also easy for you if you're doing any modeling, if you're trying to understand the data that you're looking at to try and make some recommendations rather than have to change the measure. You've just quickly got this slider here. So great feature in Power BI, the what if parameters. So that's the video. If you liked it, please do hit the like button. If you're new, please hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.